Good evening and welcome to the Sky News Courier Mail People's Forum. We are live from the Broncos Leagues Club here in Brisbane, just 9 days out from the Queensland election. This is looming as a very tight contest, and that is largely due to the, well, unknown wildcard One Nation factor. So tonight we've actually brought three leaders together to face this audience of about 100, little over 100 undecided voters. They've been chosen by Galaxy Research. They are going to be asking the questions of the three leaders tonight. Would you first make welcome the Premier, Annastacia Palaszczuk. Premier, thank you for joining us this evening.
Thanks, David.
Grab a stool. I think yours is in the middle.
Okay, thank you.
Would you please also welcome the opposition leader, the leader of the LNP, Tim Nicholls.
Good. How are you?
Tim Nicholls, thank you. Good evening. Thank
David,
you for coming.
thank you.
And finally, would you welcome the One Nation leader here in Queensland, Steve Dixon.
Thanks very much.
Thanks for coming, Tim.
Hi, Steve. How are you?
Now, before we get to everybody's questions, we're going to hear some fairly brief, hopefully, opening remarks from each of the leaders. And we've agreed on an order, in fact. We're going to begin with the Premier. Annastacia Palaszczuk, over to you.
Thanks very much, David. And thank you very much, everyone, for coming along tonight. I love these formats, and I'm looking forward to hearing your questions. I know that the number one issue facing Queensland at the moment is jobs and employment. And today we had some really good news for Queensland, with 134,300 jobs being created since we came into office. And that's working with business and industry together. I know that there's so much more that we can do together. But also, too, I also know that government needs to deliver services. And health and education are so important for our growing state. Everywhere I go, I know that families say to me that they want good quality education for their kids and good quality health services right across our state. And I'm absolutely committed to ensuring that we have jobs, health and education front and centre of a future government that I will lead. So, look, I'm looking forward to hearing your questions tonight. I don't promise to have all the answers, but I'm happy to share in this conversation with you tonight. Thank you very much.
Premier, thank you very much. Our next opening statement from Steve Dixon.
Queensland, I'm so honoured to be here tonight. David, Premier, Opposition Leader, and particularly the crowd here tonight. We've got some big problems in Queensland. I believe both the major parties have absolutely lost their way. Cost of energy's gone through the roof, cost of living generally. I was at the last sitting budget in Parliament. Both the major parties voted together to increase fees and charges and also registration fees. We've got a plan to drop the cost of energy by 20% for all businesses and all residential households across Queensland. We've got to do better than what we've done in the past. Gas is more expensive here in Queensland than it is to buy in Japan, and that gas is dug out of the ground right here in Queensland, exported overseas, but we're paying ridiculous amounts of money for it. One Nation's got a plan to get Queensland back on track. We want to create a future for our children and for our grandchildren, and the only way you can make that happen is by voting for One Nation on the 25th. Thank you so much for coming along here this evening. Should be a great evening. Thank you.
Steve Dixon, thank you. And our final opening statement from Tim Nicholls.
Thanks, David. Good evening, Premier, Mr Dixon. I came to Queensland as a 12-year-old. My mum and dad came up here and invested in a small business. They took a risk. They took out a big mortgage. They brought my two sisters and me up here. They raised a family and they owned their own success. They had ups and downs. We didn't know anyone when we first came here, but they took a chance. They saw the opportunity that Queensland could offer, the opportunity for a better life that wasn't burdened by red tape, where you weren't paying too many taxes, where if you backed yourself, you could take a chance and you could be successful. That's the state that I believe in. And so the question for this election, and the question that I ask that you ask yourselves, is who do you think is best placed to create that opportunity again? Who is best placed to help you and your family get ahead? Who is best placed to create the jobs that we need? Who is best placed to take action to deliver cheaper power? And who is best placed to build the roads and the bridges and the dams that will create jobs and grow Queensland to provide that future that I saw and that I experienced with my family so many years ago. A future where we hold it in our hands and where what we do determines our success. Not a government, not burdened by taxes and not burdened by red tape, but where if you back yourself, you'll have that chance of success, you'll have that chance of a job, and where we can raise safe, strong and secure families. And if you look at the policies we've released, I believe that answer is the LNP government.
Tim Nicholls, thank you. All right, time to get straight into the questions, and we want to get through as many as we can this evening. So I'll invite you to keep the answers as brief as possible and keep the questions as brief as possible so we can get to as many of you as we can. All right, let's see who has a question to begin with. Yep, we might start right down the front here. If I can just grab your name first.
My name's Kerry and I'm a carer for my son. The NDIS has come in, which is great. It's helped us a lot. But what happened when it come in is some of the health service funding was stopped. So as an example, my son has a catheter which needs changing every 4 weeks by Blue Care. The funding to them has stopped. So it means that instead of paying $5 a visit, which we were paying, we are now paying $115 a visit. What are you going to do to help lessen those gaps for us in the health services?
Let's go to you first, Premier.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much, Kerry. And as a former Minister for Disability Services, I understand the issues that confront families on a daily basis. And the National Disability Insurance Scheme is a great way that we can transition people and make sure that they do get the support that they need. I'm actually very concerned that you've just said about those costs. I'm more than happy to have a look into that for you, because you shouldn't have to be paying more. And also too, we want to make sure that, you know, your child gets the very best, and so I'm more than happy to look into that for you. So I understand your concerns. I know that it is very important. And, you know, as I've travelled around the state, I've met with so many people in exactly the same situation as you. With the transition happening, we're slowly rolling it out. I think because it's federal and state, it's not going to all happen smoothly at once. But we want to make sure that we do get the best care for people. And it's about empowering people as well to make choices with disability.
Just remind me, what was the Blue Care, was it, that you said is the name of the organisation? You're paying more than $100 extra every month.
Yeah.
Okay. And Premier, you've just said that's not on. You shouldn't have to pay that at all.
Well, I need to look at the exact circumstances, but that doesn't seem right to me. So, you know, that seems to be very unfair.
Tim Nicholls?
Well, Kerry, my wife's an occupational therapist and she works with disabled kids in a special school. And we hear stories like this all the time. In fact, that was the reason why one of the proudest achievements I have is actually to do the deal with the federal government to introduce NDIS and to put $1 billion extra into the program over the next 5 years. One of my real concerns with NDIS that I hear a lot about is that we're not getting the funding out of Canberra that we need to make it happen because it's run at the federal level. So my pledge to you is that I will stand up for Queensland and make sure we get every cent of money that we can get so that you have the funds necessary to be able to deliver this, you know, to be able to look after your son, so that we can actually make sure that you're not out of pocket in that way, because you shouldn't be out of pocket in that way. You should be able to continue to be able to afford those services. One of the most important things that we need to do as a community and a society is to make sure we look after those who are less well able to look after themselves.
Is it a Canberra funding issue?
No, it's a state issue, because NDIS say they look after the disability, but then some things that the disability causes, they say are health issues, which then become a state issue.
So it's out of the health department, not out of that whole funding pool. Okay.
Can you do anything about that?
Well, as I say, that will be something that we would need to have a look at what exactly the funding options are around that, and
sounds like why
that's occurring, because obviously I don't know the answer to that particular issue.
All right,
but it's about putting the funds in to make it happen. Kerry?
All right, Steve Dixon.
Kerry, very, very straightforward. If you were paying $5 and now you're going to have to pay $105, something's going wrong with the system. I mean, immediately, whoever gets elected after the 25th, they've got to fix this situation, and I'm sure the three people right before you now will make sure that you're not going to pay $105. That's the first thing I'll say. The NDIS, it is a fantastic system. Is it going to deliver everything for everybody in the state of Queensland? I'm not absolutely sure that it's going to. You know, this is a system that's got to work very well between both the federal government and the state government. I think there's still the revenue streams. We've got to see where that's going to come from. But your particular case, if we do get the balance of power immediately, there's no way in hell you're going to pay $105 where at the moment you're paying $5. That is ridiculous. Just recently I had a young lady who I had to go to the health minister and meet. She wasn't being given oxygen by this government, so I know the health system's in a fair bit of trouble. This is a young lady, she's an epileptic, and I could not believe that the state government denied her oxygen. But after seeing the health minister, he saw the light of day and made that happen. So there are mistakes happening everywhere, but as they arise, we have to fix them. Yours is one of many, many mistakes that are happening in this state, and that's why we need to fix this state.
All right, thank you. Well, thank you, Kerry, for that question. OK, let's go right here. Yeah.
Thanks. Hello, my name's Nikki, and I'm a volunteer in community services. So I wanted to ask you about the rates of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders who are incarcerated. And in the last census, 32% of the adult prison population in Queensland were Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islanders. And also they are 11 times more likely than non-Indigenous Queenslanders to be incarcerated. And I would like to know what each of your parties are planning to do to decrease these numbers.
Let's start with One Nation's Steve Dixon on that.
Thank you very much for that question. Indigenous people in this country, I think, have copped the raw end of it. We've got to look after them. We've got to create prosperity. We've got to create opportunity. And there are many, many opportunities to do that. We've been throwing money at this particular situation. I think it gets down to, in Indigenous communities, we've got to get a good police officer, a good educator and a good health system. And I think if we take care of those three things to start with, but then it's about creating long-term jobs. And I was very fortunate in a previous government. I was the Minister for National Parks, Recreation, Sport and Racing, and we were looking at creating opportunities with Indigenous areas so that they could get into tourism and creating tourism opportunities within Indigenous communities, I think, is a great opportunity. And that will create a lot of employment. But also, another policy that we have here in Queensland is about crocodile management. We're going to create crocodile farms up and down the east coast of Queensland. It is a big problem in North Queensland where potentially many people could get taken in the not-too-distant future. One Nation was the first party to come out and say, if we can't relocate, we're going to eradicate those crocodiles, but at the same time create crocodile farms up and down the east coast. These are money-making machines, and there are many, many other ideas.
I'll just cut in there because I think we're getting away from Indigenous imprisonment. But to you, Premier, is crocodile farms the answer?
Sorry, was it Nikki, your first name? Sorry, thank you, Nikki. Look, for a start, we have Leanne Enoch as our first Indigenous female Cabinet Minister sitting around the Cabinet table. So we've got someone sitting there talking about these issues regularly, raising these issues regularly with me in Cabinet. Now, what I believe the best way to lower those levels, and yes, they are too high. We all accept they're too high, and we need to do more about that. But the best way is to get young people into employment. And that's exactly what I have been focused on through programs like Skilling Queenslanders for Work. This was a program that was axed by Tim Nicholls when he was Treasurer. Getting people back into work, making sure that they have the skills and opportunity. And today I was at a skills centre over at Acacia Ridge, and it's about getting people into apprenticeships and employment. I firmly believe that if we are going to change those high rates, we need to work together as a community. I also believe that elders should be allowed to come into our correctional facilities. They were stopped access by Tim Nicholls when he was Treasurer. That's not the sort of Queensland I want. We need to work together, make sure that we're doing everything we possibly can. But the key thing here is fundamentally jobs.
OK. Seems to be agreement on that aspect at least. Tim Nicholls?
Well, obviously an economic future, a job and an education are critical. But we just need also to look at the way things have been done in the past, Nikki, and say, are there better ways of doing it? And I was up in Cairns yesterday and announced that we would, an LNP government would issue social benefit bonds to work with the NGO sector to deal with the issues of homelessness and vagrancy and people not returning to country in places like Cairns and like Townsville, where people come in to go to the hospital, or they do have a court appearance and they get trapped in the city and don't go back again, and don't go back to their communities where they do have the support mechanisms to be able to break that trap of living in the cities, getting caught in the cycle of violence, getting caught in a cycle of crime. We want to work with the non-government sector on their ideas. We don't believe all knowledge and wisdom resides here in Brisbane to find solutions to that. So we're actually saying to the NGO sector, the community sector, we'd like to work with you to provide us and help us deal with a solution, to deal with a problem that we've identified. So we want to empower, if you like, the NGO sector to work with government to help break that cycle in the first place.
Would any of you support the idea of a close the gap target on Indigenous incarceration at COAG?
Well, from my perspective, I think the issue is we've got to measure, and we know the rates of incarceration. I think you said 33%. Nikki, 32%.
Would you support
Nikki?
A target to set a target where it should be?
I think we want to see a reduction from that target, and every percentage point reduction is a better outcome, David. And
I'm just wondering if you'd set a target at COAG.
I'd be very happy to talk at COAG about what an appropriate target is. I think we need realistic targets to be able to achieve it, rather than just to throw more money at a problem which doesn't seem to be getting any better.
You would include that in the close the gap targets?
I think we talk about those targets and what's actually achievable based on the best information we can get from people who do work in the sector. They know it far better.
Okay, what about you, Premier?
Yes, I think we should. Absolutely.
Yep.
Absolutely, I think we should.
Steve Dixon?
I'm very, very happy to set targets, but I think we've got to deal with reality. We've got to get on the ground. I'm not joking about what I said earlier. We've got to start within those Aboriginal communities. And anybody think it's going to get solved out of Canberra, they're kidding themselves. It's going to get fixed right here in Queensland. And this government, whoever that may be, needs to take control and look after these people and give them genuine opportunity.
Okay, next question.
Hello, I'm Craig. I'm a tax lawyer. But my question is about the Great Barrier Reef. I see that as a real treasure to Queensland. What is your party going to do to ensure that companies like Adani are not going to harm the Barrier Reef?
Adani. Tim Nicholls.
Sure. Well, the process around the Carmichael mine has been going since 2010, and it's gone through a very extensive environmental approval process at both the state level and at the federal level under governments of both persuasions. And we don't believe that it's a question of one or the other. For 40 years now, longer, Queensland has been successfully exporting coal and successfully enjoying the benefits that tourism on the Great Barrier Reef brings. But we need to maintain those very, very tight controls. The issue, though, is about how we can get the jobs from both of those projects. We need the jobs in regional Queensland that something like the Carmichael mine can bring, and we also need to preserve the jobs on the Great Barrier Reef. We've signed up to the Citizens of the Great Barrier Reef initiative, and it was under the LNP that we negotiated with the UNESCO around the plan that was subsequently followed through with some changes by the Premier's government to actually put in place the protections around the Great Barrier Reef. I've dived off the reef. I know how good it is, and I speak to the dive operators there, so we need to preserve that great treasure. But it doesn't need to be one or the other, provided we've got the strongest environmental controls around the Carmichael project.
All right. Premier, do you agree with that?
Look, in relation to the Great Barrier Reef, it is not just a state treasure or a national treasure, it is an international treasure. And just yesterday I had the amazing opportunity of seeing firsthand the magnificent Heart Reef. I mean, this is just incredible to have on our doorstep, and that's why my government is putting in over $100 million in terms of fixing up the amount of sediment and improving our water quality coming into the Great Barrier Reef. And in relation to the Carmichael mine, they have the strictest environmental conditions at both a state and federal level. But what I've said very clearly is that I have vetoed the loan. I do not believe that taxpayers' money should be going towards a billionaire to build a railway line. Now, at the last election, Tim Nicholls and Campbell Newman wanted to commit $500 million of your money towards building that railway line. Secondly, the two people on either side of me here, Tim Nicholls and Steve Dixon, want to build a brand new coal-fired power station, in Collinsville on the doorstep of the Great Barrier Reef. I know that we need a transition to renewables, and I know that the answer is not a brand new coal-fired power station. And let me make it very clear. There is no appetite to build a new coal-fired power station. It would take 7 years to build, and there hasn't been a new one built in 10 years. It is not the answer. We are moving towards renewables. We are the energy powerhouse of the nation. We will continue to be that, but we will do everything we can to protect the jobs.
OK, just before I get to Steve Dixon though, Premier, you referenced there your decision to veto any loan to the Adani mine. Your Treasurer, Curtis Pitt, did write to the federal government saying Queensland would uphold its responsibility should any loan be given. There has been chopping and changing here.
Our election commitment at the last election was very clear that we did not support...
But since then, there have been letters from your Treasurer.
Not last Friday, the Friday before, I said very clearly that we were going to veto that loan.
So why was that?
I made that decision. If you want to go into details, I'm more than happy to go into the details. I've canvassed that at length.
No, I'm just wondering if you can explain to the viewers and those in the room why.
OK, well, there was an LNP smear coming towards me, alleging a conflict of interest, and therefore, to put that to rest, I vetoed the loan.
Was there an LNP smear coming, Tim Nicholls?
Well, thanks, David. I think there's a few things we need to clarify there. Firstly, the current Palaszczuk Labor government is offering a subsidy for the Carmichael mine in the form of a royalty holiday. They're not being required to pay the royalties when every other mine would be required to pay them. They're paying them at some stage in the future.
Is that a subsidy, Premier?
No, it's not, because every dollar is going to be paid back in full and with interest. So what Tim Nicholls is saying there is simply incorrect.
All right, well, back on the smear question.
I'm sure if you asked any other mine operator, they'd say it's a subsidy.
OK.
And people know when you don't have to pay something when it's due, that means you're not having to pay for it.
This allegation that the LNP was going to smear the Premier over this.
I know nothing about that. I have met and know the Premier's partner, and I said at the time, he seems like a nice fellow, he's entitled to earn his income, but the Integrity Commissioner gave advice to the Premier, and that said she should remove herself from the decision-making process. It didn't say to veto the loan. It simply said remove yourself from the decision-making process. We then heard a whole series of flip-flop stories from the Premier. But what surprises me, and I think is probably the most difficult thing to understand, is that a Premier of this state would put her job ahead of the jobs of thousands of regional Queenslanders who are crying out for this project to go ahead. With youth unemployment above 20% in Townsville and above 20% in places like Rockhampton,
well, indeed. Premier,
young people want those jobs.
Can I just say, Tim Nicholls sat with me at the signing ceremony in Townsville, and they had all the approvals and they were going to get on with building that mine. They said they would get independent finance, and their job now is to get on and build that mine for the regional jobs. But we are not giving taxpayers money. We are not giving taxpayers money for the building of that railway line.
Do you accept, though, that does put at great risk the prospect of the mine going ahead?
David, no, because they actually said that they don't need anything more. They're ready to go ahead with that mine.
Let me just test the audience on this. Before we get to the loan for a rail link, who actually thinks this Adani mine should go ahead? Hands up. A few. Who actually thinks there should be any sort of federal or state taxpayer subsidy, loan, royalty holiday or anything for this mine?
Yes.
Nobody. Nobody thinks there should be any sort of subsidy or loan? No? No, nothing? All right. Steve Dixon, you do.
Yep.
David, thank you very much. Let's be very clear. The Adani mine, the Carmichael mine, was approved by the federal and state government. So those approvals are already in place. It gets down now to the salient point whether or not the federal government is going to loan an overseas multinational company $1 billion to build the rail line that's going to transport that coal back and forward. One Nation's plan is very, very clear, and Senator Hanson has made this clear for a very long time. We are not prepared to give that $1 billion to an overseas multinational company. We want the people of Australia and the people of Queensland to own that rail line so they can derive an income of up to $600 million a year. And that money can be utilised for many things, building schools and hospitals, but more importantly, it can go into projects to protect the Great Barrier Reef. And I was involved, as I was the National Parks Minister for some time, protecting the green turtle on Rain Island, saving a species, and that can be done 1,000 times over with that income stream that is derived. So we all need to look at the big picture. Coal mining is happening in Australia. It's how we go about it. It's how we utilise that money. And it's a bit like the gas I spoke about earlier. Governments have sold us out. This time we've got the opportunity to take that money and use it for the benefit of the environment.
All right, well, a couple of things. You're saying no, you wouldn't back any sort of federal loan for the Adani mine?
The money that comes from the federal government I would like to see given to the Queensland government to build and own that rail line. The public of Australia and the Queensland population should own and operate and derive the income from that line and utilise that money to protect the environment but also build schools and other facilities Queenslanders are going to need. Remember we spoke about the NDIS earlier. We need money to fulfil all those requirements.
The Premier also referenced the plans for a coal-fired power station in the north of the state, and Steve Dixon, to you on this, you actually want taxpayers to build that.
Absolutely.
How much would it cost?
Well, what we're looking at is putting $1.5 billion forward, and all our funding is totally costed. We're going to...
Sorry, $1.5 billion.
We're going to reallocate...
That wouldn't cover a coal-fired power station.
If I can just give you the full answer, we're going to reallocate money from the $5.4 billion Cross River Rail project. We're going to put $1.5 billion toward that. The opposition leader, I understand, has done a deal with Malcolm Turnbull that he will assist with money to build that project.
Okay,
I think it
just on One Nation, if we can, do you expect you can build a coal-fired power station for $1.5 billion?
No, I don't. We would go dollar for dollar with the federal government because they have the Northern Infrastructure Fund, and we will require the Prime Minister, as any government, if they are good enough to give money to the LNP to build a coal-fired power station. I'm sure he's just not the Prime Minister for the LNP. He's the Prime Minister for Queensland.
Just sticking with One Nation, though, do you know how long it would take to build a coal-fired power station?
Well, my understanding it can be between 2 and 4 years, unlike the Premier who said 6 to 7 years earlier. It's a matter of the will to make something happen.
The federal government's estimate is 3 to 5 years. So would it do much in the next 3 years to tackle power prices?
Well, David, if we don't start now, what do we do in 3 to 5 years' time? We've got a plan for the future now. It's about baseload energy, and if people think solar is great, it doesn't work at night. I love solar. I love wind. But wind doesn't blow when the wind's not blowing, and solar doesn't work at night.
Tim Nicholls, your plan is to have a privately funded coal-fired power station. Would you expect federal help?
David, no, we're not. We've been approached by a number of companies who have said to us that they are very interested in developing a new high-efficiency, low-emissions power station.
Who are they? Because to the Premier's point, no one's done this for 10 years.
Well,
who are they?
They've approached us in confidence about that,
no
and so I'm quite cautious about telling, you know, private and releasing confidences.
No, fair enough. But the market has been pretty clear. No one's done this because they don't think it's a good investment.
No, what we've seen is the government's own report, which they had in February and which they hid, which shows at half the current wholesale price of electricity, which has gone up 70% under this government, a clean coal-fired power station would not only be viable, it would reduce emissions, it would improve security of supply in regional Queensland, and we're talking about North Queensland, and it would deliver lower prices. So, and it would do so with about a 40% fewer emissions. Okay. So that's a plan to deliver cleaner power, cheaper, and more readily and more affordably.
Thank you. Look, it's a big issue, so thank you for spending a bit of time on that to the three of you. Let's get to just another couple of questions while I'm over this side. Sir.
Yeah, my name's Adam, and I work in marketing, and I'm a public transport user. With the rail fail and the bus safety issues in Queensland, just wondering what you're going to do to improve the safety issues of the bus transport and the issues surrounding the rail.
Just for those watching around the country, what are the bus safety issues that you've experienced?
Well, there was a major incident last year with I think a Pakistani bus driver being set alight on fire. The bus drivers should be feeling safe, so should the passengers. Yeah, I'm just concerned that, you know, as a public transport user, things should be put in place. I understand there is a few being rolled out as we speak, but just drivers... Are
you talking about some sort of shield around the driver, that sort of thing in every bus?
Well, yeah.
Okay. What do you think about that idea? Steve Dixon, to you first.
Yeah, happy to. I think law and order is out of control in Queensland, to be brutally honest. If you go to Townsville, you see that every day of the week. But particularly relating to the issue that you're speaking about, it gets down to what we do to these people that create these crimes, because what's happening at the moment, people are going before the court and they're being let go on a regular basis. And it's a bit like looking after your children. If they do something wrong, you don't just chastise them, you've got to stop them from doing that. And when law and order is involved, you need to, people go before the court and they actually need to be incarcerated if they do something ridiculously wrong. If you do not teach people a lesson, they will continue to do the wrong thing, and I think that's what's happening in this state. We're all of a reasonable age here in this audience tonight. Law and order, I don't think, has ever been in such a bad situation. And I take you to Townsville now. Up there, young people are stealing cars. They're driving to the local police station and they're taunting the police to follow them. No pursuit policy. I think we have to empower the police force to do their job. And we made a commitment that we will change the police service back to the police force and let police get on and do the job and back them 100%. Okay. That's exactly what we will do.
Premier.
Look, thank you. I think you were referring to the tragedy when Manmeet lost his life as a bus driver in that horrific circumstance. And I can remember being at an anti-domestic violence summit when I got the call that that had happened. I've also met with his family who have travelled from India to speak to me about that personally. The person who did that is currently going through, I understand, mental health examinations in terms of whether or not he can be prosecuted or not, and I'm not going to go into details about that because they would be matters before the court. However, we do know that after that, a lot of bus drivers are very concerned about their safety, as well as passengers travelling on the bus network as well. So we are working with the council in terms of what we can do in relation to improving the safety, and I know there has been a call out in terms of having a more of an enclosure for the drivers so they can actually feel safe. And I also want to pay mention tonight as well that there was a brave young man who actually came and broke down the back of the bus window and were able to get people out of that bus. But an absolute tragedy, and was felt by the entire community. And I know that passengers are very concerned about that. So, as well.
Premier, would you fund these shields that we're talking about here for the driver?
I think there are some issues about whether it's council or state. More than we are working. I know that Jackie Trad, as the Transport Minister, is working with the council. I know the union has raised that issue as well. I've met with bus drivers. I understand their concerns, and we don't want to see another tragedy like that again.
Right, Tim Nicholls.
Like the Premier, I've met with Manmeet Alicia's family and the circumstances of his death were terrible. I understand the council who own the bus fleet are actually taking action to provide some protective barriers for the drivers, which is a good thing. And there's also CCTV on those buses as well, as I understand it, to aid security. And we all think that what happened was deplorable. I think there are some questions over the way that the system is operating, particularly as to how this person was let out in the first place. And there are some unanswered questions as to how that was actually able to occur, and that'll be investigated. I think the other part of your question, though, was about the rail fail. And that's seen 2 million fewer people travel on our trains in the last 12 months, according to report figures that were only out just in the week before the Premier prorogued the Parliament. And one of the big things that happens there, and I know I've got a 14-year-old daughter and she catches the train. And Friday afternoons I get a phone call saying, "Dad, can you pick me up? The train hasn't come again." And that's a continual problem on the northern lines through my electorate, through Toombul, through Eagle Junction and through Wooloowin, and the Doomben line is the first one that gets cut off. It's just not good enough. We have a government that's been held... Well, the government has been held to ransom by the union, the drivers' union. And under a government, an LNP government, we will put passengers first, not the rights of the unions. We'll open up the recruitment process to outside of the union movement. We'll say, if you can come in, if you can pass the test, you will be qualified to drive a train. So we won't be held up. We won't see those fewer passengers because, you know, people expect a decent public transport system. In our term of government, we lifted the on-time running up to 96% and stopped all these faults and failures. And at the moment, we have had a rail fail. It's been for far too long. It's inconvenienced far too many people. Okay. And we've seen 2 million fewer passengers catch the trains as a result.
Thank you. We've got a question right here, sir.
How you going? My name's Sam. My business takes me from Brisbane all the way up to Mackay and out to Winton. Coal mines aside, what I'd like to know is what other initiatives have you got that's going to drive some more life into these towns, especially in the Central Highlands, where if you're not blessed to have a job with any of these multinationals, you can shoot a cannon down Middlemount, Dysart, Capella, Alpha. So where are you focusing on exporting Queensland goods out to the rest of the world, and what are you guys going to do to drive business back into Central Queensland? And is there ever going to be a time where people like us stop listening to the major party leaders constantly saying they're fixing up the problems of the previous government, rather than looking over our shoulders? Are we going to start looking forward as leaders rather than blaming what happened prior?
I like the last part of that question particularly. So how about we try in these answers not to blame the previous lot. Premier, we'll go to you first.
Yeah,
what are you going to do for Central
Queensland?
Queensland?
And I've actually been out into some of the Central Highlands area just recently, and one of our booming export industries out there at the moment is in relation to chickpeas. So our exports have actually grown quite dramatically. They've increased 43% over the past year, and they're now at a record $70 billion. So when you're exporting from Queensland $70 billion worth of goods and services, that actually means jobs locally. Now, you mentioned jobs and employment in local areas. You also mentioned Winton. And I had the great honour of going to Winton a couple of times as Premier. And we spoke to the councils. And the council said to me, one of the best things that you could do for us is to get people into work is if you give us certain amounts of money for road upgrades, community infrastructure, we can get people out on the ground quickly. And the former Mayor of Winton, Butch, was a great advocate of that program, and my government has invested $400 million going across regional councils to get people into work. But not only that, we've invested in people in terms of our Back to Work program. And this came directly out of people sitting down with me and saying that they wanted an opportunity to get into work. So we will actually give businesses between $15,000 and $20,000 to employ someone who either A, has lost their job, or B, who is a young person. We had a target of 8,000 people in 2 years. We've already reached 8,000 in less than 2 years. And if we are re-elected, we will extend that job-generating program. And it generates small business, but it also gives people the opportunity to get into work.
OK. Sorry to jump in. We're going to have to keep the ball going. Steve Dixon, your thoughts on that?
Very, very clearly, to put a foundation underneath business in this country, we need two things. We need cheap energy and we need cheap water. And the issue that we're facing, I was up in Townsville recently, a little restaurant up there, their power bill's $500 a week. They've laid staff off. By dropping energy by up to 20%, and that's what our party's committed to do, that is going to inspire businesses to come to this state, and they're going to employ people, and they're going to continue to grow. And exactly the same thing goes with water, about building dams and weirs from Townsville down to Rockhampton. But we have a major initiative and a vision for the future, and that is a hybrid of the Bradfield scheme about taking water to Western Queensland. And that will happen over the next 20 years. And how that will be funded, it will come about by procurement, saving money through procurement of the Queensland government. Every year we spend up to $15 billion a year, and people are clipping the ticket for 20% on the way through. Think of that, there's $3 billion a year that is saved alone that can go towards building projects, dropping the cost of energy and delivering great outcomes for this state. And there are other initiatives too. We've got to look outside of the existing box. I push medical cannabis. Most people in this room probably know that. Think about it. We export 54% of the world's opium supply out of Tasmania. Medications are $1 trillion a year. Why can't we turn Queensland into the export capital of the world for medical cannabis? I just want 1% of the world market. That's $10 billion a year. Will we get a tax regime out of that? Absolutely. Okay. We have to look to innovative ideas, job creation and a future for our kids and our grandkids. That's our plan.
Tim Nicholls.
Sam, good question. I've been out there a fair bit too. And I've been out to some of the agricultural areas and some of the resource areas as well. Our commitment is a new deal for regional Queensland, and it does involve providing cheaper power. That's important to create jobs and to enable businesses to grow. We've also got a $500 million supercharged royalties for the region program. And that's about putting back into those communities the money that's earned out of them. And that can go into things like road upgrades. It can deal with some of the less sexy stuff but still essential stuff, such as water treatment plants, ensuring a reliable water supply into towns and into communities, building the roads that we need so that products can get to market. It's no good growing it if your truck or your train can't get it to the port to export it. And you're right, we should be a vibrant, dynamic exporting nation. It's where we are going to grow into the future. So we need that money to be spent there. We've also announced plans to build and do the EIS for the Nalinga Dam outside of Cairns, which has the potential to open up agricultural areas. Also the Arana Dam west of Mackay towards the areas you're talking about. 30,000 hectares of new land under irrigation driving into those export markets of Asia, as well as the Rookwood Weir outside of Rockhampton for the same reason, and raising the Burdekin Falls Dam, which is going to feed water into those mighty sugar-growing areas of North Queensland. So a proper plan to build the water supplies we need, to build the roads that we need, and to invest $500 million into a supercharged royalties for the regions program. And we've also got our buy local program, so that we will break up those packages so that local firms will have the right to price match against the best price that we can get. We get value for money for Queenslanders, and we give local Queensland firms employing local Queensland workforces the opportunity to price match and actually do the work, employing more tradies, more people throughout the length and breadth of the state. It's a comprehensive plan.
You know, I think they all did pretty well in not bagging the former government, so a tick for that. Look, all of these things, whether it's building coal-fired power plants, more dams, the money for councils and so on, all, you know, perhaps they are good ideas, but they all do add to the bottom line. Yeah. One thing I haven't heard any of you mention tonight is debt. Debt is going up and up. It's going to hit $81 billion in a few years, the highest in the country per capita. Is anyone going to do anything about the debt? Tim Nicholls.
Well, the first thing you need to do is to have a strong economy with lots of people in employment and jobs. You can't pay anything down if you don't have a job. And so our focus very clearly is on our plan to grow 500,000 new jobs over the next 10 years by cutting payroll tax each year for 10 years,
okay, but
by delivering cheaper power.
Debt means either selling something or reducing your outlays. Are you into either of those?
No, we've made some very clear commitments about that. There's no asset leasing or sales, and we are very much committed to maintaining a public service of excellence. We've released a policy in relation to that. And
so no cuts to any spending, no sales of anything.
That's exactly what we've committed to doing. So in
debt
terms
will keep going up. Annastacia, Palaszczuk?
Well, you've got to give us a chance. No, mate, come on. You asked the question. You've got to give us a chance to answer it.
So will debt keep going up?
So what we've said is we will maintain a balance over the economic cycle. And everyone knows, and anyone who runs a household knows, some years you're going to have higher expenses and some years you have lower expenses.
Debt will go up to $81 billion?
And we will, well, certainly under the current government, that's where the projection is.
No, I'm asking under you.
So,
under you will go up to $81 billion.
What we're saying is what we want to be able to do is to stabilise that debt so that it doesn't get worse.
Will it go up to $81 billion?
Over the term of the economic cycle. But we're not going to strangle opportunity to do so.
Will it go up to $81 billion?
Well, the current projections are that it will go up to $81 billion. What we've said is we're going to stabilise it. We're not going to rush in to try and immediately reduce debt because of what may happen, and we're going to manage it over the cycle. As anyone who runs a household knows,
just ask some high, go up to $81 billion under the LNP.
I beg your pardon?
Yes or no? Will it go up to $81 billion under the LNP?
I can tell you this, it'll always be less under the LNP.
That's the sort of answer, though, with respect to Nicholls, that I think a lot of people get sick of. Yeah. Will it go up to $81 billion under the LNP?
Well, as I've said, we will seek to stabilise it. I hope it doesn't. But we're not going to cut off our noses to spite our faces.
But that is a non-answer with respect.
No, but I think that's what people don't... I don't think people want a promise that you can never keep or that you're never going to be likely to keep, because that's even worse.
Okay.
So we've got to be realistic about it and say we need to deliver services, employ people, and that's the key that we've got to talk about.
Premier, will you do anything to tackle the debt?
David, when you were mentioning that, it is now $5 billion lower than what was projected under Tim Nicholls when he was Treasurer.
Okay, but if we can't blame the previous side for a moment, what will you do about the debt?
Point number two is I keep my election promises. So at the last election, I said that we will keep our assets in public hands. We would use that money to pay down debt and restore frontline services. and we did that. We paid down debt and we've restored frontline services that were savagely cut by Tim Nicholls when he was the former Treasurer. And I'll just say 14,000 people lost their jobs. And
okay,
there's
I don't want to
dignity
relive
in work.
that. Sorry, Premier.
I think that's all relevant, David. It's all relevant.
Okay, but debt is going to keep going up to, as I say,
well, let me make another point. Let me make another point.
I'm just wondering if you're going to do anything about that.
Well, have a talk to Moody's. Moody's has looked very clearly at our economic plan and they have taken us off negative watch. They've taken us off negative watch, okay, and we are now
You haven't got the AAA back. You haven't got the AAA back. Are you going to do anything about the debt?
But we're off the negative watch. And that is because we have delivered, measured and responsible budgets.
Okay,
that's what I promised the people of Queensland, and that is what I have delivered.
Steve Dixon, would One Nation do anything about the debt?
Absolutely. David, as I mentioned earlier, procurement, $15 billion a year. And I'll give you an example. There are preferred contractors in Queensland that will use school roofs as an example. The average roof to put on a school is $1 million. They subcontract that work out, cost $800,000. They clip the ticket for 20% on the way through. We can save $3 billion a year there. That's every year. We slot $1 billion a year off debt reduction. It's pretty straightforward. This happens in local government, state government and federal government. There is money to be saved everywhere.
So it's a matter of taking a business principle. It's a higher taxing approach.
Pardon me?
It's a higher taxing approach.
No, it's not a high taxing approach at all. This is about money we're existingly spending right now, $15 billion a year. What we're going to do is fire those preferred contractors. We have over 200,000 people working for the Queensland Government, and I think they need to earn their money in this particular area. We can use them to do procurement. If I had 200 people to do procurement instead of those lucky people that are clipping the ticket for 20% on the way through, and this is very easily explained. For every $100 we spend, we want $100 value, not 80.
All right, let's get another question here. Over to you.
Oh, yeah, me. Oh, great.
It is you.
I'm so excited.
Don't be shy.
Look, thanks.
Yeah.
Look, my name's Anne and I'm a marriage celebrant, okay? So I agree with what you said. You know, Queensland used to be the best state to live in. It was the cheapest state, it was the best state. Trains, it's like living in a third world country now, it really is. Fuel prices are just going up and up and up. Electricity, honest to God, you know, it's just ridiculous when so many households are having their electricity cut off. Now, that's a basic human right. You know, this is wrong. Steve Dixon, if you do, you know, get to talk to these two after the election, are you two going to listen to him and sort of say, oh, OK, we'll work with you? Because I wasn't going to even think about One Nation, but you've said a few things tonight that are making me start to think, OK, but are you two going to sit down with him and work? Not like Cat Party, when it just kept getting put off and off and off, and they kept saying, well, OK, whatever, you know. Are you two going to say, OK, you've got some good ideas, let's get on with it, and let's get Queensland back to what it damn well was, because, you know, it's going down the gurgler in a big way, really big way.
Yeah. And thank you. Well, I think the crux of the question is, would you be willing to work with One Nation if necessary? This is it's been a bit of a question through the campaign. Premier, to you first. What would happen if we had a hung parliament situation? Would you work with One Nation at all?
No. I've made it very clear. Sometimes you've got to stand on your principles. And I will stand on my principles. And if that means going into opposition, we'll go into opposition, because I don't want to see the chaos and confusion that will come with having these two former cabinet ministers who sat around a cabinet table together forming an alliance, a coalition that would be embarrassment not just to Queensland, not just to our nation, but the rest of the world. It would undo all of the good things we've been trying to do to work together. They don't agree on policies. How is it going to work? I've made it very clear. I've signed a statutory declaration, and I'm going to stand by that, because I believe in this state. I believe in the people of this state. I believe in the services that we're delivering in health and education. I believe in continuing to grow the economy to create jobs. Why would we throw all that away? Honestly, just think about it for a moment. Why would we throw that away? All of that hard work. We've been restoring, making sure we've got the nurses and the doctors and the teachers and the teacher aides and the paramedics across our growing state. We're getting people into work. We're working with the councils, we're working with business, we're working with industry.
Okay, I'm sorry to jump in there, but we're tight on time.
I know,
so
but
that's
it's a very important point, David. It's probably the most fundamental point of this election campaign.
You would be in opposition, would you even have another election?
I have said very clearly, at the end of the day, this is a choice for the Queensland people. But I'm going to stand on my principles, and I will not do a deal with One Nation, full stop. Full stop.
Tim Nicholls, your line throughout the campaign has been no coalition, no ministries, but would you accept the support of One Nation to form government?
Well, David, and good question. And you're right, power bills have been going up, 70% increase. And we're offering, through our plan, to take power bills back down by $160 a year, saving you around about, by 2020, around about $780 a year. And that's our plan, and we've explained how it's going to be there, and helping small business. Dealing with the trains, I've spoken about that tonight as well. So we go into the... And fuel prices, I guess that's a bit beyond the state's ken, really.
You used to have a fuel levy, though, didn't you?
There was a fuel levy that the former government, and I don't want to go there,
right.
took off,
Yeah,
but it's gone. Yeah. So that's not coming back. I really don't believe that's going to come back.
But I think Anne's question goes to working with this guy. Sure,
but there are a number of precursors to it, I guess. So I want to answer each of those to say, we've heard what you've said. We understand people are frustrated with the major parties. I get it. I've been out talking to people. They tell me that all the time. You're not listening to us. So we have been listening, and that's why we're putting those policies out there, because we think they're the policies that will work to deliver you cheaper power and jobs, and to build the infrastructure, and to give you that hope that I spoke about and you spoke about. And that's what we're in this business and in this contest to do. And so we're asking everyone, if you do believe in cheaper power, if you do believe in building the infrastructure and that hope, please vote for the LNP. And we're not ashamed to ask for that, because that's what we're about.
OK, but getting to the crux of this question...
We'll also... You know, we're not going to say the will of the people shouldn't take place. People should be able to vote how they want to vote. The Premier last time said she wouldn't do a deal and signed up with the Catters and the Independents and all those sorts of things.
That's not true.
Well, hang on,
that's not true.
That's the Premier. I'll just let you respond to that.
That is not true, Tim. You know that's not true. In the end, I got support from Peter Wellington, one of the most honourable and dignified members of the Parliament, a man of utmost integrity that showed support for me forming government. But with One Nation, it is definitely no.
All right, Tim Nicholls, sorry, you were saying that's not what the Premier put before the election.
The promise was, I won't be governing with anyone
So what about
else,
you? Let's get back to this question. Would you actually take the support of One Nation?
Well, we're in this contest to win it. No team goes...
Yes or no?
No team goes on...
Yes or no?
No team goes onto the field...
There's plenty here saying yes or no at the moment, Tim Nicholls. So it is a straightforward question. And sorry, if I can just say, voters at this point, 9 days to go, probably deserve to know...
That's right.
Would you be willing to take the support of One Nation?
Well, I've said very clearly, as you've said, no deals, no coalition, no shared ministry, and we will deal with the Parliament and the elected representatives that the people of Queensland put forward.
So if you need to form government with the support on supply and confidence of One Nation, you would?
I'm looking to ask the people of Queensland to say, if you want a team that's unified, that's solid, and that will act in the best interests of Queenslanders, please support the LNP.
But the reason this question...
And I will deal with the outcome of the election once that's known.
Okay.
But I'm not going to deal in the hypothetical of what might be.
Well, it's not really that hypothetical, and the reason the question keeps coming is because there's no clear answer. One more time, would you be willing to accept the support of One Nation if you need it for supply and confidence?
David, I will deal with the Parliament that the Queensland elects.
Steve Dixon, let me go to you on this. What would your position be in a hung Parliament?
Well, David, I think we've got to take on board the two conversations that you've just had with the Premier and with the Leader of the Opposition. The Premier has said she doesn't want to deal with up to 20% of the people of Queensland representation. That's 20% of voters. That's what we're hearing out there at the moment that want to vote for One Nation. The Leader of the Opposition is not too sure what he wants to do. He hasn't given you a yes or no answer. My answer is going to be very, very clear to you. I'm happy to work with both of these people for the benefit of all Queensland, and that's what every politician should start to do in this state. You go back 100 years ago, that's what politicians got elected to do in the state of Queensland. They represented their area, they came down to the Queensland Parliament, and they worked for your benefit. And I'm sorry to say, neither of those people just said that.
Can I just ask, is there one thing you would demand from just one policy that you would demand in return for your support?
No, there's many. There's many.
And
I've got to say, I'm not a soft touch, and nor are the One Nation people, and nor are the people of Queensland. They want roads, they want rail, they want dams, and they want infrastructure, but they want jobs and they want a future for their children. That's what I want. That's what One Nation wants.
All right, question right here, sir.
Yeah, my name is Tapash. I'm a citizen of Queensland. My question is, we all know Adani is a crook. And how are you going to be sure that what he says and his companies are going to deliver the jobs and prosperity that you are saying he will?
For legal purposes, let me just say we're not alleging any impropriety on the part of Mr Adani. Nonetheless, this is a concern clearly for some. Tim Nicholls, to you first.
I spoke about all the environmental approvals and all the controls that were in place, and the Queensland government and the federal government have put in place many monitoring obligations, and will be monitoring the performance of that contract. Some of the things that have happened have been also agreements being signed with Queensland companies to deliver, for example, the railway infrastructure, the things that go into it, and that's creating jobs. Those companies have got their preliminary contracts with that company. So those sorts of things are being monitored by the government, as I'm sure they would be by governments, whatever persuasion, to make sure that they are honouring the contracts and the deals that they have signed. Also in places like Townsville and Rockhampton, they have already established their head offices, and I think there's more than 100 people already employed in the Townsville office of the Adani group up there. So these are things that are monitored.
Look, if anyone has anything they want to add to that, otherwise we'll try and get through just a few more questions.
The only thing I would add, David, is that, of course, they have to comply with the laws of Australia. And they have to abide by those laws. There are strict environmental conditions, and if they break those laws, they will face the full force of the laws here in this country.
All right, terrific.
Just very, very quickly, gets back to the $1 billion loan. We're locked in stone. People of Queensland own that railway. Nobody else is going to own it, particularly the Adani company. That's where we stand.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Thanks, David. My name's Jason. I work in the city and I'm a father to 3 wonderful kids. I wanted to ask you guys, given all the violence and gun deaths in America, why are 2 of the parties here talking about relaxing gun laws when John Howard fixed all this back in 1996?
Steve Dixon, to you first. One Nation, I was reading your website on this today. You do want to make it a little easier, at least, to buy guns.
Well, we have, I think, over 200,000 registered shooters here in Queensland, and these are normal people, just like you and I, and there's probably some people in the audience here tonight that go and shoot at rifle ranges, and they frequently shoot maybe shotguns and play target shooting. It's a sport. It's like any other sport. We're not going to take that right or that privilege away, or the right and privilege of farmers to own a Category H handgun. They use that on motorcycles, and they travel around, and sometimes they have feral pests, sometimes they need put down injured stock humanely. This is the sort of thing that we believe in. It is not about going out and letting anybody and everybody own a gun. There are very strict
specifically
rules.
What do you want to change?
Pardon me?
Specifically, what do you want to change?
Well, what we're looking to do is make it easier for people that actually have gun licences now to be able to go to rifle ranges, and we're going to extend those permits to 10 years right across the board.
Is that
but they have
for
to.
Our safety, though?
Pardon me?
Is that votes for our safety?
No,
votes
what it
you
is,
in
it's
exchange for our safety?
people have gone through a stringent process already to own a rifle or a handgun. We have some of the toughest gun laws in the world here in this country, and John Howard did a very, very good job putting those in place. Not just anybody and everybody can own a gun. I'm a registered handgun owner myself, and I do it as a sport, and I enjoy going to the pistol club, and I meet doctors and I meet lawyers and I meet garbage men. We are people of all different jobs and persuasions, but it's no different to a person owning a truck. We've seen what can happen with a truck in Europe and in other places. They drive them on footpaths and they've killed many people. Everything can be used as a weapon, and it's very sad in our society today that is true. But gun laws that we have at the moment are very, very good. We just want them to be a little bit more flexible for people who are already registered gun owners.
Sorry, the time is tight. Tim Nicholls, do they need to be a bit more flexible, the gun laws?
We've supported John Howard's gun laws. We had a vote on it in the Parliament, and we voted with the government in relation to the classification of the Adler shotgun in that part of the world. We actually think it can be made safer by having a better gun licensing system with a more up-to-date computer-based system that will speed up the process for checking for police and the issuing of licences. Currently it's an old paper-based system, or it's a less effective system, and we want to have a better system and a faster system, but we support John Howard's tough gun laws.
Premier?
I don't want to see any watering down. I'm sorry, I don't want to see what's happening in the US ever happen here. I just think it's... Imagine waking up and losing a loved one like that. I don't want to see any watering down whatsoever. But what we have seen is One Nation and the Katters want to allow more use of guns and less stringent requirements. And I think, Tim, even your Police Minister, Tim Mander, was talking about being more flexible when it came to issuing permits as well. I don't want to see any weakening, full stop, and you won't get that from my government.
Just a response.
Let me be clear on that, David. That's not correct. What we've said is we need a better system to deal with the applications and the processing and to give the police the opportunity to review it all. And we actually voted in favour, as I say, of the tough gun laws. So I want to be absolutely clear that the Premier's not right on that.
Thank you. One right here.
Hello, my name's Julia. I'm a public servant. In 2012, I heard Campbell Newman say that no public servant under a government he led had anything to fear. And apparently I did because I lost my job. Mercifully, I'm back in the public sector and I have a position, but I'm concerned about whether I can trust what you say about no sackings, no forced redundancies. Will that change? Can I trust that for the term of your government that this would be the case? Or will you force people like myself who perhaps are on secondment in a higher position that I may have to go back to my my other position? I've got a husband who's about to lose his job. I might like to keep the position I have, and I'd just like to know what your... And also, the other thing I noticed at the time was that the LNP government that led at that time led vitriol against the public sector, and it was very hard to work under a public sector ethics code doing the best job for a government that was openly leading hostility against the public service. So I'd just like to hear your comments on that.
No, and I understand your question and I understand your concern, and I'm very sorry to hear about your husband as well. And I've said quite openly that we made mistakes in our term in government that an LNP government that I lead would never make again. And we have heard really loudly and clearly the stories like yours. So I'm sorry for that. We made mistakes, and I put my hand up and say, yes, I made that mistake. We have learnt, and I have learnt from that. And that's why we've made a very, very clear commitment that there will be no forced redundancies, there will be no increase in voluntary redundancies, and in fact we've released what I've called the Public Service of Excellence policy, where we want to work with the public servants, with the people who want to do the best that they can do for the people of Queensland, to deliver the services that a government needs to deliver. And I spoke earlier about making sure we were best able to help those who need help, because that's the role of government. And so that is my very, very clear commitment. And yes, we made a mistake, and I accept that's the case.
And you apologise for it?
And I have apologised for it, and I continue to do so as well, because I do know of the difficulties and the hurt it caused people. So I apologise to you as well again tonight, Julia.
Yeah, I think Julia's question goes to trust, as I was going to say. What can you say, because this promise was made before, the last time. I mean, how accountable are you if there are any, job losses of this type? Do you resign? What happens?
Well, I'm held accountable by the people. They vote, and they held us accountable last time. And that's a lesson that, of course, we heard and heard loudly. And that's why I've been very, very upfront in saying we did make that mistake, and we do apologise for it, and we have learnt that lesson.
She's accepted the apology. So
and Julia, if I can say, because you asked me another part, for the term of a government.
Thank you. I'm just going to get another question through here to you, sir.
How you going? I'm Rob. I'm a truck driver. I drive all over this state, this lovely state of ours. I know you've all got your own agendas. What people are asking, can you work together, put your ego on the door floor, get rid of your bullheadedness, and let's get this state to what it used to be. Everyone's sick of just watching you, Tim, saying, we're going to do this. You, Anna, we're going to do this. And you, we're going to do this. Why can't you just get together and just say, righto, let's get it done. And work together. That's what we vote for you for. Get in there, work as a team for Queensland. Not yourselves. For Queensland, because I'm getting sick of watching the power go up and my kids struggle. Okay, I drive all over this state. fly in, fly out miners. I was born in Mount Isa, lived my life in all of Queensland. They built a mine, they built the town around the mine.
That's right, yep.
And you allow fly-in miners, I'm telling you, they're not Queenslanders, they're not New South Wales, Victoria, they're New Zealanders and they come from everywhere else in the world. So please, how about you start working for Queensland? How do you become the state of origin and let's win it.
What a terrific question. All right, so I'm interested to see how you tackle this. How are you going to tell this crowd, prove to this crowd, on a great question, how you work together? Premier, how about you go first?
Well, look, every day
Maybe a big hug or something. I'm joking.
Every day I listen to Queenslanders. I get out and talk to people. I travel the length and breadth of this state, and all I want is the best for people and their families. That is what I try to do each and every day. And I admit I'm not perfect, but I've got a good team around me, and we work hard. And we have seen positive signs, like I said, in the economy, growing our economy, our agricultural exports are great, our tourism numbers are the best we have ever seen.
Okay, but I think we're getting away from the question, which is how you work together. I mean, is there any idea in your mind, I'm just thinking off the top of my head, could you have a weekly meeting? Is there some way to change politics? To work together, that's the question.
Well, I want to work with Queensland. That's what I've been doing my whole time as Premier. I listen to people and I deliver for people. I can't do anything more than that, David.
Okay, then we'll go to Tim Nicholls. What would you do to work together?
Well, Rob, you might be surprised to know it, but the Parliament actually does pass most of the legislation in agreement. It's only on some of those areas that we have differences, and it's those areas that are important, that we believe are important to you, and that's about who can better deliver the cheaper power. Who's got the better policy to do that?
South East Queensland isn't the Mecca.
No.
I've got a son that lives in Townsville.
Yeah.
He's only got one provider for his power.
Yep.
And they're stuck paying the highest.
Yep.
I've got to get you a microphone. Hang on there, Rob.
Yeah.
No one can hear you at home.
Mate, I was...
there you go.
You know, as I said, South East Queensland isn't the Mecca, and it's about time people realise most of the money does come from the north of Queensland. The coal, the copper, the gold, you name it. Mount Isa, lead, zinc, copper, gold.
We're a rich state. We are.
Well,
we're very fortunate.
How about you give them people some reward up there by building better roads, give them better schools.
And we're doing that.
And look at moving some of the taxes you waste down here to up there. I live in Brisbane. My wife works at the Royal Brisbane. I drive her to work some days, and the traffic is horrendous. Why? People don't trust the buses or the trains because they're never on time. She's come off a train at Kalanga, and guess what? Standing room only, no seating. So, come on, guys, how about you start pulling all of Queensland together? And by the way, guns. I've got family in farming. How do you put down a horse that's broken its leg? It's a cruel thing to see. Now, the gun laws in Australia are fantastic, righto? But don't blame the weapon, blame the person using it.
Thanks, Rob. Let's get back to that first part of the question, though. Steve, Dixon, we haven't heard from you on this one.
Well, I think I talked about it a little bit earlier this evening. I'm very happy to work with every single member of Parliament. We all should be. You know, it's not about fighting. It's not us and them. It's about all of you, and it's about our future. And if we don't start to pull this together, the debt's going to get worse, the jobs are going to become less, electricity is going to continue to go through the roof. Well, people continue to fight and argue in the Parliament. I see it regularly because I sit up the back and I've got a fantastic view. But it's not good enough for the people of Queensland. I'm very happy to put out the olive branch to both of these people in this room, but it doesn't seem that they actually want to put out the olive branch to that 20% of people at the moment that are representing one nation. I want us to be one state of origin team, and I think that gentleman up the back has hit it on the head, and you should be running for Parliament.
There might be a conversation after the program. We are sadly running right out of time, which brings us to our closing statements this evening. We're going in the same order as agreed. Premier, to you first.
Oh, look, first of all, can I thank everyone for coming along tonight? And I know you've given up your time, and I've really enjoyed the opportunity to answer as many questions as I possibly can. And I'm more than happy to stay around. If you did have a question that you didn't get to ask, please come and talk to me. I think we live in a great state. I'm absolutely humbled by the people I meet every day in all different walks of life. It is an incredible honour to be Premier, and I'm humbled that the people of Queensland put their trust in me. What I can clearly say to you is that what I can promise to you is I will promise you good, decent government. I promise you that I'll put your interests first and foremost, that I'll continue to work on creating jobs, but also to making sure that we have the health and education facilities and services that you deserve. Finally, I want to leave you with this. At this election, you're going to have a clear choice. Do you want to see a continuation of good, decent government, or do you want to see the possibility of chaos, with Tim Nicholls as Premier, backed in by Steve Dickson? Both of these people sat around the cabinet table and made those decisions of the savage cuts to jobs and to services. We have been repairing that damage. Our best days are ahead of us, but we can only do that if we continue to work and strive together. And I give you a commitment that I will work hard each and every day to continue the good, sound work that we have done over the past 3 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Premier. Steve Dixon, to you.
David, we've got a plan to drop power in Queensland. We've got a plan to create jobs. We've got a plan to drop debt. But what I've heard tonight, listening to this crowd, and I think there's a great distrust in politicians. That's what I pick up wherever I go across this state. And that shouldn't be. And I've got a bit of an idea how we can actually work out who's telling the truth and who's not telling the truth. I was talking to Paul Murray a bit earlier on today, he works with you, and put a bit of a plan together. You heard of a polygraph machine, lie detector test? How about we, and Paul Murray's offered to do this next week, I'm willing to do it, to stand before him and hopefully these two people beside me to answer questions about Adani, to answer questions, are you going to fire people, to answer questions about, are you going to sell assets? They're the questions that I'm sure this audience wants to see answered truthfully. I'll do it on a polygraph machine or on a lie detector test. Will the two beside me? That question, let's see what happens next week. Very pleased to do that.
All right, our final closing statement from the LNP leader, Tim Nicholls.
I believe in Queensland. I believe in the opportunity that it provides. I believe that it can be, and it ought to be, what it provided me when I came here as a 12-year-old and the opportunities it gave us. It should be a place where if you want a job, you can get a job. And that's why we've got a plan for 500,000 jobs over the next 10 years. It should be a place where you don't have to worry about turning on your air conditioner or your pool pump or the kettle, and the power bill is going to rock you when it comes in at the end of the month or the quarter. And that's why we've got a plan to cut power bills over the next 3 years by $780. And it should be a place where we are building the future through the roads, the bridges and the dams we need to see this state expand and provide jobs. And that's why we've got our plans to build $1.3 billion worth of dams, invest in congestion-busting opportunities like a second M1 to the Gold Coast and duplicating the Sunshine Coast Railway line, as well as putting $500 million into our supercharged royalties for the regions program. And I simply say that if you think about what it is you want out of this election and who can deliver the change that's going to benefit you and your family, who can take real action on the cost of living and who can deliver the jobs that Queenslanders want and need, then I'd ask for your support at the next election.
Thank you, Tim Nicholls. Now, before we thank each of our leaders for being here tonight, can I thank each of you for being here tonight for some terrific questions. We did get through, well, perhaps not as many as we would have liked, but we did get through quite a number. Hopefully this process has helped you make up your minds ahead of the election, just 9 days to go. Don't forget your wristbands to pop them in the box, and those watching at home will bring you the results of how this crowd of undecided voters have, well, whether they are leaning one way or another after what they've heard here from our three leaders tonight. So thank you. Would you please thank our three leaders for giving up their time during the middle of this campaign and taking all these questions. Annastacia, Palaszczuk, Tim Nicholls and Steve Dixon. Thank you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And there you have it. David Spears, another excellent job hosting the Leaders Forum for the upcoming Queensland election, and a fascinating night it was. A strong performance by Steve Dixon, the One Nation leader up there. The usual discussions that we would have thought, Adani, but it was the balance of power questions, and I think Steve Dixon nailed the mood of this crowd of undecided when he said that there's a distrust of politicians, and that came through over and over again. Premier Annastacia Palaszczuk stuck pretty well to her script. No more explanations on Adani. No, she wouldn't do deals. She said she would actually go into opposition rather than do a deal with One Nation. And LNP leader Tim Nicholls, again, putting the strong line he has, but ran into trouble on that issue of whether he would do a deal with One Nation and a few other things. So it will be interesting to hear the results of that room of undecided voters. We'll bring that to you very soon. In the meantime, we're going to go to our panel for the first hour tonight, who've been watching the debate and will give their assessment on it until we get those wristbands in and David Spears comes back. Joining me here in Sydney, a man who has rushed back from what's going to be an interesting discussion, can tell us all about a wild day in the Senate today. ACT Liberal Senator Sed Selzasia, how are you?
I'm very well, Janine.
And thank you very much for coming in tonight. You literally must have rushed out of it. You would have been glad to get out by the look of what was happening.
Well, look, it's been a long week, but look, it's great to be here in Sydney. Great to be here with you on the show.
We'll, as I said, we'll come back to exactly what was going on in that wild day. And in other states, the rest of our regular Thursday night panel, Darren Barnett from the McCall Institute, who's in Melbourne tonight. Welcome, Darren.
Thank you, Janine. Lovely to be with you.
Okay, and up in Brisbane, where it's all happening, Gary Hargrave. How are you going, Gary?
Well, look, I just wished I was at the Broncos because the pokies and the bar might have been a little more amusing than the last hour. But anyway, yeah, it's great. And good to be with you, Zed.
Great to see you.
Okay, I'm going to just give you an idea in case you haven't seen it. Just one of the grabs that we used. Oh, actually, before we go, we've got Spearsy there. Let's get hot off the press what the vote was. So let's go to David Spears up there at the Broncos in Brisbane. Hi, David.
Hi, Janine. I wish I could tell you. We're still waiting for the count to come through on that front.
I thought for a minute. Look, I'll get your assessment first so we can go to it. But just quickly, how would you sum up what we saw?
Look, I thought, look, each gave their best, I thought, tonight. I thought the Premier did looked perhaps more at ease than the opposition leader, Tim Nicholls, and I thought Steve Dixon, as you indicated in your initial remark there, had a pretty strong night as well. Of course, easier for the third party in an event like this where they're not having to, defend a record of being in government in the past, per se, and can be the non-politician answer there, if you like, on a lot of those things. But yeah, clearly there were a couple of moments there where we saw the opposition leader Tim Nicholls, whether it was on, whether he would accept the support of One Nation to form government, not giving an answer, and that didn't go down well with the crowd. I also thought it was quite interesting too on Adani. No support at all, and admittedly we are in southeast corner of Queensland here, but no support at all for a loan for this mine that's meant to be the great jobs boom for this state. And that showed up in a poll we had a little earlier today as well. There is, it would seem, whether you think the mine should go ahead or not, little support for the idea of taxpayers' money going into it.
Yeah, and that was interesting because when you asked the audience, there were, admittedly, it was only a few, I think a handful, I couldn't really tell, but there were people who supported the mine. But there was no one who supported the loan.
No one supports the loan, exactly. And, maybe there's a case for the loan, maybe it all gets paid back, maybe it's a really good investment, but clearly that case isn't getting through to the voters here in Queensland. I think it gives you a bit of an inkling as to why Annastacia Palaszczuk rather spectacularly mid-campaign announced that she would veto that loan with the power that the state government has.
Well, it'll be interesting to see how they did vote, those undecided voters, because you really got the feeling that they were undecided in it. They swayed, it was very interesting on the questioning, I think. So we should get that in a few minutes, I hope, David.
Yeah, we should get that soon. Oh, there were some terrific questions there, particularly Rob at the end, the truck driver, who was really getting stuck into getting right up all of them, frankly, for not working together, for not doing enough on power prices, fuel prices, congestion in Brisbane, and on it went. You know, he clearly enjoyed the soapbox, but good on him. He made some terrific points. And, you know, I think it gets to the thing that gets up the nose of a lot of voters wherever they are in Australia, that the political system seems broken, that politicians can't work together for the national good or, in this interest, the state's good. I'm not sure if any of the answers were terribly convincing. Another one of those moments, I suppose, where Steve Dixon can capitalise and say, you know, I'm willing to work with everyone, I'm just here to help.
That's exactly right. I think it played into exactly his narrative about we're not them and we're looking ahead. I think there was another comment where people said they were just sick of everyone blaming the previous government. So some of them picked that up and thought we better start looking ahead and talk about what we can do, not what we haven't done. So I thought that was interesting. OK, we're going to head back to David, as I said, as soon as we get those results in. But meantime, let's hear what our panel made of the debate tonight. Zed? What did you think?
Well, look, I think it was a very strong performance from Tim. You know, I think if you look at the policy platform he's putting forward, which is all about jobs growth, things like their plans for cutting taxes to grow jobs, obviously supporting Adani, obviously supporting things like a new coal-fired power station to bring down costs. I mean, I think it's a great policy package, and I think he delivered it very, very well.
Gary, what did you think up there in Queensland? Who came across well?
Look, I think it's easiest. I know all of these. Yeah, I know all of these guys incredibly well, and you know, obviously Tim and Steve and Dixon. I mean, Steve Dixon sat in the Newman government, and he and Tim Nicholls were the best of friends. But I thought personally, I was very sad to sort of see an absolute bitterness between the two of them. You know, opposition leader Mr. Dixon. I thought that was, to my mind, quite sad. I thought Dicko actually did pretty well. I thought he actually did sum up some pretty straightforward language until the polygraph plan that he
I hadn't
claimed,
got to that yet, Gary.
Yeah, okay. Sorry, Janine, but I'm not peeking. I'm not peeking at your rundown. But that left me a bit cold. Look, I thought Tim Nicholls had a very hard row to hoe. Because of the fact that Campbell Newman has been looming large in this election. Labor has brought that on. And I kind of wish that Tim had actually used Steve's response when he said, when Steve said, I'm happy to work with everybody. He kind of said that, but he didn't. And my big criticism of both he and the Premier, who I think did very well also, because she's sort of like everyone's older sister kind of thing. But I think that they both went into too much technical language, where Steve Dixon actually cut through and he actually, look, he said, yeah, don't like it, going to fix it. Detail, no, there's none, but that's pretty typical One Nation. So, yeah, I think Queenslanders will be even more confused after tonight, to be honest, but we'll see what the room does.
Yeah, it was certainly straight talking. I'm with you. Steve Dixon certainly came across well in what they were, the distrust of politicians, as Spearsy said. Yep, Darren Barnett, what was your call on that?
Oh, I thought that Mr Dixon cashed in pretty well. I thought his performance was good. It's always difficult if you're the person in government and you're defending your record as well as trying to sell new policies. And for Tim Nicholls, it wasn't that long ago that he was in the Treasurer's chair. So the task of both he and Annastacia Palaszczuk is not that different. So, look, I thought it was interesting. It's good to watch someone with the talent of David Spears interview politicians, because he just asks until he gets an answer that is adequate. And I thought,
did a great job, just a great job.
No, he did a terrific job. And I thought he did a good job about the 81 billion debt, and also about whether or not parties would join with One Nation. But look, the two leaders I think did pretty well, but certainly if you're the third wheel, it's a much easier task on a night like this, and because of that, I think Mr Dixon probably will come up trumps.
Yeah, no, I thought David did very well in pinning certainly the Labor and LNP down on that really thorny issue of what they do. I think he got further. Zed, I'll just ask you, we will talk a bit about it probably. The plan that Steve Dixon mentioned for lie detectors, now, you know, this is Paul Murray's idea, obviously. I haven't heard from Paul on this, so I'm flying blind. But the polygraph idea, now, as a politician, what do you reckon?
Look, I'm not a fan. It's not because I tell porkies, but I'm not sure how far you go down that path. you know, some politicians have let us down over the years. There's no doubt about it. By not being 100% honest, I think the best thing we can do is to learn from their mistakes and always tell the truth, and that's what I endeavour to do. But I'm not sure we need polygraphs.
I'm going to leave that one there until I hear from Paul Murray, who's obviously, as you know, off on paternity leave with his new baby at the moment. Whether he's coming back with a lie detector in his baby pack, I don't know, but he'll no doubt let me know, and I will tell you.
It's a baby
first.
monitor.
And look, while we're still waiting for the result from that People's Forum and David Spears, look, let's get into a bit of what happened in the Senate today, because it was an extraordinary day. I thought, after all the love that was in the air yesterday after the same-sex marriage result, this might have spilled over into the Senate. And for the first hour or two, it does seem to have, well, there was love in the air there too. Look at this.
This is the most personal of debates, because it is about the people who matter most to us. It is about the people we love. So I say to Sophie, thank you for your love and commitment and for all you do.
And I never believed the day would come when my relationship would be judged by my country to be as meaningful and valued as any other. The Australian people have proven me wrong.
So it was an extraordinary day. Before we get to what happened after that, while we're still in the warm, fuzzy stage, Zeb, firstly, what are you going to do on the vote? Because there was an interesting... What we saw today was even some of the Conservatives were saying, look, let's get on with it, let's fix it up later, these protections on religious freedom. It was a convincing vote. Some are saying not so much. Where do you stand? Where are you going to vote?
Well, look, what I said before the vote and what I've said since is that, you know, I'll seek to honour the will of the Australian people. The Australian people have voted yes, but that's not a blank cheque. The bill, as it stands, I don't think has adequate protections, and it's not just, I guess, no voters who believe that. People like George Brandis, who voted yes, have said that he would like to see additional protections in the bill. So it's going to depend if we can strengthen the bill. I would like to see it strengthened in a number of areas, and if that's the case, then I could certainly support it.
But in its current form, you couldn't support it?
In its current form, I wouldn't. I'd seek to strengthen it. But in the end, I want to facilitate what the Australian people have said. They have said they want same-sex marriage. They've also, during that, you look at all of the polls, they've expressed the view that they do want to make sure some of those other concerns are taken care of.
Well, you say that, yet the argument of the no side was, how can they vote for it when they don't know what the next bill is on the freedoms? Well, they did vote for it, because they have trust in the politicians to do it. So the argument of some saying, well, let's fix it up later, even no voters said that, do you think the mood is swinging to that? Where do you think it's going to go?
Well, no, I don't. But if you look at, I mean, the yes case very much said it won't affect these freedoms. And I think a lot of people took that at trust. I think if you look at the news poll consistently, it said people around about 60-40 sort of wanted the change, but around about the same proportion also wanted strong protections. So I think we can honour both, and that would be a great result for the country if we get to a situation where we don't say to the 40% who voted no, and some of those who voted yes, who are concerned about these things, that your concerns don't matter.
Do you think you can get it through by Christmas, though, as the Prime Minister is promising?
Look, yes, I do, and I think we will.
OK, Darren Barnett, what did you think? We'll get to the other events in Canberra, but just on the same-sex marriage vote and where we go now on these amendments, what are you thinking?
Oh, look, I think the Australian people have spoken, and plenty of people, including Mr Abbott and others, have said that they will respect the will of the people. I welcome Zed's commitment that obviously there's still some detail to be worked out, but he will respect the will of the people. I think it will be passed by Christmas. In terms of those concerns, that will be addressed by politicians in the parliament. That's their job. But the fact that we will very, very likely have same-sex marriage legalised in Australia by Christmas is a very, very positive step for the nation, in my view.
Gary Hargraves, do you think the momentum's there that they can overcome these issues on the religious freedom, any amendments they want?
Well, Janine, I'm of the view that we're just going to get on with it now, and as everyone has said, the people have spoken. But my big concern, though, I just want to sort of deal in a philosophical sense, that the more we codify our rights, the less rights we actually have. And all I'm worried about is that the tone I'm hearing, I even heard Simon from the IPA on Bolt's show earlier tonight. It almost sounded like we're actually going to set up the cake police. And so I really am concerned that some people are now trying to think about, in other words, everybody's going to get something happen to them. So we actually now have to have a mechanism to say, oh, if you order a cake and someone won't sell it to you and all this. So please, Zed and colleagues in Canberra, please don't over-legislate us to death on this, because I got to tell you, I don't know whether it's a joke, tweet or what, but there's a suggestion the Australian Bakers Association have distanced themselves from this, saying any baker that doesn't sell a cake to somebody who wants to buy the cake's an idiot and going out of business. And so, you know, I know it's a serious issue, but if we just over-legislate and try and presuppose and guess every scenario, we're going to end up with a battalion of public servants going around cake shops and floral shops and visiting churches and inspecting the conduct of every person. I think we've got to believe most people are going to do the right thing, and if they do the wrong thing, I think there's existing laws that can deal with it, Janine.
Zed, would you like to just answer on that?
Sure. Look, Gary, I agree with you broadly. Can I say that I think if you look at, obviously there's been a lot of discussion about things like cakes. I don't think that's the main game. But if you look at, I guess, the scenarios that have cropped up, obviously there's been a lot of concerns about things like the safe schools, so parental rights, the ability to conscientiously object is very important. And we have seen archbishops dragged before tribunals for talking about their faith and their view of marriage. So those are some concrete examples that have been happening, and there's concerns that they could become more problematic. So those are the obvious ones that I think most people would like to see addressed.
I have to leave it there. We're going to pick up what happened in the Senate today in just a minute, but we're going back to the Broncos in Brisbane with David Spears, who has just got in the results from that Leaders Forum held just before this show. And the question was, David, who are you more likely to vote for at the end of it? What are the results?
So we had just over 100 undecided voters here. They were chosen by Galaxy Research, and unlike most, they get to sit for an hour or a little over an hour here listening to each of the leaders asking questions. So they get a pretty good sense of whether, they can be won over. So let me tell you the results. Annastacia Palaszczuk, we're pretty happy with the result. She's come in with 60% of the undecided voters here saying they are now more inclined to vote for her or for Labor. Tim Nicholls, not a great result for him. It's come in at 12% only.
Whoa.
For Tim Nicholls. Steve Dixon for One Nation, 10%, and still 18% undecided. So still a sizable group there that are still undecided. That's perhaps not surprising, although, as I say, you spend an hour plus in the room, you would think that would help you make up your mind, but still 18% undecided. I think that's as I said earlier, I don't think Tim Nicholls had the best of them tonight, but I find that number pretty surprising. Still only 12% saying they're more inclined to vote for him, but a whopping 60% for Annastacia Palaszczuk.
Do you also find it a surprise, given that all we've heard about is the One Nation vote and the fact that there was that mood in the room, the distrust of existing politicians, that narrative that seemed to play to One Nation, and yet a very good performance by Steve Dixon, and he only got 10%?
Yeah, he did have a good night, and only 10%. Don't forget we're here in Brisbane. Look, the people here have come from a lot of the outlying suburbs as well. True. So yes, there would be some One Nation territory there as well, but we're not in some of those other parts of the state where that One Nation vote might be a little higher. Nonetheless, 10%, I'm sure he won't sneeze at that, but the standout is just between those two major party leaders. I mean, 60% for Palaszczuk, 12% only for Nicholls is, it's a pretty wide gulf there, Janine.
And that would, do you think, David, indicate the uphill battle that Tim Nicholls has?
I think absolutely it does. I mean, already he's having to fight the, fracturing of the Conservative base to One Nation. And look, I think there's been, a lot of people waiting to see whether this preference, not a preference deal, but arrangement to have One Nation ahead of Labor in 49 seats is a good idea or not after what we saw in the West Australian state election, where it didn't play out well at all for the Liberal Party there. So, look, it's already an uphill battle for Tim Nicholls. I think what you saw here tonight was that you know, that heavy weight of the Newman government experience still fresh in the memories of so many. I mean, that question towards the end there, which did rightly garner an apology from Tim Nicholls for the public service job losses. But, you know, he doesn't want to be standing there giving apologies at this point of a campaign. He wants to be there talking about the positive things he has in plan for the state. So he's still having to deal with that legacy, and it is weighing him down, clearly.
OK, David, well, we'll let you go. It's been a long day, a long night. Fantastic job. The vote here on the panel is that you actually won, but apart from that, that's the normal performance that we expect. But look, thank you, and that was a fascinating result, and it was actually terrific to watch. Even sometimes in those state debates, there are things you're not interested in, but you really felt for the people of Queensland the choice they've got to make. So no doubt we'll talk more about that in the coming days. Thanks very much. Have a good sleep tonight. Thanks, David Spears.